Welcome to Lickin' on Lending, the podcast that dives deep into the heart of the mortgage industry. Your host, David Lickin, bringing you the latest insights, trends, and updates from the world of mortgages. Whether you're a seasoned industry veteran or just getting started, this show is your go-to source for all things mortgage. On Lickin' on Lending, we're not just about delivering information, we're about delivering it in a way that's lively, engaging, and yes, even entertaining. You'll hear from a wide range of regular contributors, experts who make the complexities of the mortgage business not just understandable, but enjoyable. Our goal? To keep you informed on the operational aspects of the industry. Everything from regulations and compliance to technology and market trends, without ever being boring. We believe that staying up to date doesn't have to be dull, and our interactive conversational style ensures you'll be hooked from the get-go. So get ready for detailed discussions, lively debates, and a wealth of knowledge that will help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of the mortgage industry. Let's get started. This is Lickin' on Lending. Now your host, David Lickin.
Listeners, we're in for a real treat today. We've been talking about technology and all the changes that are happening. Isn't it something how some people seem to get ahead of the curve and be at the right place at the right time with the right technology solutions? Joining me today is David Levine, also affectionately known as Moto. David, good to have you joining me here.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here, David.
You and I met 25 years ago when I had the privilege of going to work for one of the companies that you had started. Again, this is back right around 99. I had been trading online on a new platform called Pedestal. It was a way we could trade mortgage loans. It was new, innovative. As I was leaving, Pedestal was so impressed with how I was trading and my vision, I got caught up in it. But I also had just heard about Ultraprise. And a friend of mine, David Matthews, who you had hired to be the president, chief operating officer, if I recall correctly, you had hired him, which was a brilliant move, by the way. David Matthews is brilliant, as you are. And it's a perfect combination. David Matthews is excellent on execution, putting together teams. You're brilliant on innovation and looking over the horizon at what's coming. So it's a great combination. So I told Matthews, we're selling the company. I'm going to probably go to work for Pedestal. And he said, over my dead body. So I started working with Ultraprise. You guys made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I was thrilled to be joined up with Matthews. But then, David, that started a long-standing friendship. One of the things I admire about you is your marriage. You and Monica have an amazing marriage. I just admire your values of who you are and what you're about. And so many people who are entrepreneurs get a little on the crazy side and they lose sight of the core values. You have those, David, and I applaud you for those. And so I'm really excited to share with our listeners your vision of some of the things you're doing. David's going to take us on that journey. But to start this journey, David, let's first start talking about your journey to where you're at today and what you're doing.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. And for me, technology is extremely personal. I actually live in West Virginia, and most technology entrepreneurs back in the 90s, when Silicon Valley was rising, would have moved out there. And I had many opportunities, but my wife and I said, as soon as we were pregnant with our first, where would we have wanted to grow up? What life would we want to have as children? And I told her about this little town in West Virginia called Shepherdstown. And she was really pregnant and not thinking straight. And we were walking down the street. And I was like, let's just stop into a realtor. And next thing you know, we're buying a little house on 5 acres in the woods on the river, away from everything, as far from technology you can imagine. But actually, this was 1995. And it caused me to think about technology in a very different way, in a very personal way. How you get bandwidth, what's important, what's not important, and all that. So what we're going to be talking about mostly today is this intersection between real estate finance and the blockchain. And what I do, my superpower, is I have these lenses or these glasses. And when I walk through the world, when I meet with people, when I do whatever, I'm always thinking about how our lives could be enhanced by technology and what's cumbersome, what isn't working, what's this, what's that. The real moment for me of coming into this space was actually back in 1994. I presented a paper at the first International Conference of the Web at CERN Particle Physics Lab. There was about 315 people there, which was the entire World Wide Web community at the time.
Wow.
The keynote speaker was this guy named David Chaum, who was talking about digital cash. And he had a company called DigiCash. He was talking about this possible dystopian future where if the internet evolves, commerce as people are expecting, with people using credit cards for everything, and there's a record of everything. He was this privacy advocate from Berkeley, cryptographer. He said governments could wind up exerting a tremendous amount of control over your daily lives. Governments and
Very fortuitous, especially when you look at what some of the plans have been, it seems.
Exactly. And he said cash is fundamental. It's important. It's fungible. And we can't let that go away. So he invented this system where you could actually pay somebody in quote cash in a way that's non-traceable. We wound up renting a car and saying, hey, let's just drive around Europe. And we went to Prague and all these different places. And I said, let's end it in Amsterdam where David Chaum had his company. And I basically camped out there as a fanboy. And I said, I want to work with you. And I wound up 2 years later doing the world's very first cash transaction on the internet when his technology was ripe.
What year was that?
That was 1996. I sold a poem to a friend of mine who worked at Naval Research Labs for a penny. My claim to fame is I did this in 1996, so this was a good 8 years before the Bitcoin white paper was published.
Right.
I first got into real estate finance, what we call in crypto TradFi for traditional finance, when we had a client that was a local bank in West Virginia, but they had set up a branch doing mortgage origination in Southern California, and they had a liquidity crunch. They were, I guess this was now 1998, RFC used to buy a lot of their loans.
Right.
They were buying a lot fewer. And we were just having one of these technical meetings about something completely different. And I said, okay, Steve Day was the president of the bank. I said, why don't you bring in your CFO and just explain the whole process? So we went on the whiteboard and went step by step, origination, secondary market, securitization, how the whole thing works. I was like, okay, this looks like a classic liquidity problem, marketplace problem. So we actually got in their private plane from this bank in Charleston, West Virginia, and we flew to FBR, Friedman, Billings, and Ramsey, which was a big investment bank that focused a lot on this. And we met with Manny Friedman.
Oh my gosh, Manny, yeah. I remember Manny real well.
And I mapped the whole thing out on the board for him, and they funded it. They invested a few $1 million in my company, and we wound up building this exchange. So that's the origin story of my involvement in mortgages and my involvement in crypto.
It's a great story. And the part that I love about all of this is that you are in the moment. You seize on opportunities on that. And some would say you're sometimes unconventional. Anyone watching this video, you're wearing the hat. I love the hat, David. It's just perfect. And you're the Mad Hatter pulling things out of a hat. That is just outstanding. So playing on that, let's bring our listeners up to speed by starting to talk about Web 1, Web 2, and now Web 3. Walk us through that. Some know about it, but many unfortunately don't.
Sure. I am fortunate being a gray hair like you that I've seen this evolution for myself. And I remember the early days, how exciting it was, where you were constantly discovering things. And there was really only one website that anybody cared about. It was called the What's New page at NCSE, the National Center for Supercomputer Applications in Urbana, Illinois. You would send them an email and give them a link and they would list it. And every morning you'd wake up and see what the new websites were. That's literally what was happening.
Again, put us in the context of a calendar. What year was that?
Oh, gosh. When I started, that was probably 1993. The Mosaic browser came
Okay, the
out.
Mosaic. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember all
So
that.
that's when they started the What's New page, was 1993. What was really interesting about that time is it was incredibly freewheeling. Like, you were just discovering all this cool until there was this aggregation with portals. So there was Yahoo, which was a big one, and Excite, and Lycos, and AOL. Right. And all of a sudden, the only way to discover things was if someone was paying for that to be listed toward the top. And it started changing the whole character of the web in terms of the commercialization of it. And I actually remember this day when I got an email from David Philo, who is a co-founder of Yahoo, saying, "Hey, I found this site you had developed. It's really cool. Do you mind if we list it on Yahoo?" And it was like, that's how young Yahoo was. Like, it was these two guys, David Philo and Jerry Gang, like writing emails, list your site. And Web 1, because it's all websites and links, the power went to the portals for aggregating all this. So that was sort of the one learning thing. And then Web 2 started in about 2008. It became important with the growth of Facebook. So what started happening was, instead of portals being important, it shifted to platforms.
Yes.
And those platforms, to monetize their platforms, they started making it harder and harder for you to escape. It basically took over the media. In the beginning, you would read all these news articles, see snippets, and you'd go to links. And then they started basically deprioritizing anything that had a link, so you would publish directly on those platforms. It wasn't just Facebook. That happened then with Google, started giving you summaries and making it harder and harder to leave Google. Amazon, you started being able to do everything on Amazon and not other stuff. Instead of buying things in different places, you buy almost everything from Amazon because they've captured you in this platform. So that's what Web 2 is. So Web 2, the platforms, it's really about APIs and algorithms. So it's the search algorithm.
For those that don't know what an API is,
it's short for Applied Programming Interface, where if you want your data on one of these systems, you would need to conform to their, quote, API. Now, the reason this is important is you right now log into almost everything with your Google or your Facebook, maybe your Apple account. And that's their way of controlling more and more of the internet through an API, because you only need one identity, one account, and all of a sudden it doesn't really matter if you're on these other things. You're there. Spotify's a great example of that.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
So it's really about centralization and control. So that's Web 2. So why is Web 3 so significant?
And where are we at on that trajectory? That's just really getting off the ground now.
Just getting off the ground. I don't know exactly when it was coined, but in terms of the history of blockchain, you had the Bitcoin white paper in 2008. You had the Genesis block of Bitcoin, which I want to come back to because it's actually very important for the real estate finance industry. You had a protocol called Ethereum come out probably 2015, 2014. It really all exploded in 2016 when Ethereum came out with ERC20, which allowed anybody to create their own coin on top of Ethereum. So 2016 is when Ethereum became really important. 2017 was the first really major bubble where everybody was buying coins and trading them in these ICOs. Now, it became, quote, Web 3 just more recently, I would say 2021, 2022, where you had NFTs, which were like coins, but they were visual, and you could issue a limited number. People started making those represent things like properties and title deeds. People started experimenting with all kinds of different things. What really grew up in that era was something called DeFi, for decentralized finance, which was contrasted with TradFi, or traditional finance, centralized finance, which is all controlled by banks, right, mortgage bankers, etc. To explain the power of this, let me just loop back to that Genesis block of Bitcoin, because this is a great story. So good. Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, put in the Genesis block the headline from the London Times of January 3rd, 2009, that was about the British Chancellor proposing a second bailout of English banks. And he felt that that was so important that he literally inscribed that in the software, the very first Bitcoin that was ever created.
Wow.
So why was that so important? What happens with centralized finance is there are individuals and institutions in control. You're not in control. So that same warning that David Chaum gave about privacy, Satoshi Nakamoto was giving about large banks and large financial institutions and governments. Governments had full control over your money. They created your money. And banks could decide whether you got your money or not. They could put it into different things and fail, and it's not your money. So he came up with this idea of decentralized money. He said there are three primary principles. Decentralization, there's no central authority. It's trustless, meaning you don't have to show your ID. Like, you don't have to go to the bank and say, yeah, okay, this is a guy I trust versus that's a guy I don't trust. Like cash, you make your decision, right?
Yeah.
And then the third is immutable. It couldn't be changed. If I gave you $20, I couldn't rewind the clock and change the ledger and say, no, I didn't really give you $20. I really gave you $10.
Right.
So those three principles actually made digital cash in a way that is profoundly, what he was going for was self-sovereignty. He wanted individuals to be just as empowered on the internet as they were in the real world, the quote, real world, with paper money, right?
Yeah. Which paper money is anything but real.
Exactly.
And we could go into a whole bunch of different ways down the road of what this means and the implications of it. But this is significant, especially when you look at the Fed and our Treasury able to print cash at the rate that they do, creating inflationary trends, only to then say that we need to solve them by raising interest rates or doing all the things. It's the manipulation of this. And this begins to lay the seeds, the roots, the foundation for a much more stable economy, a much more stable financial footing underneath us individually and as nations.
It's totally true, because without that central bank, again, it's decentralization versus
centralization. Yep.
That's really the fundamentals of it. So with Web3, what started happening is I started thinking differently as an entrepreneur. I started thinking about products differently. I started thinking about software differently. And I came up with this little phrase for myself that the way to gain power is to lose control. That basically...
That's the same things we're taught in Minnesota. It's just counterintuitive.
Let it go. And that's what Web3 is. It's this flourishing, this incredible innovation that's happening on a daily basis. And I've become an evangelist. I can't wait for more people, particularly your audience, which is in such a crucial sector of the finance industry.
Yeah.
When we all start really using this new technology, it will be the tail that wags the dog. It will change the United States. It will change Europe. It will change the rest of the economy.
Yeah. We've watched Bitcoin absolutely revolutionize how the wealth creation from that. It's been volatile, which I think keeps people away from that. But let's answer this question. Why is Bitcoin so revolutionary?
We talked about that a bit because it tried to solve the money problem, right?
Yes.
So what I'd like to do is now contrast that with this next stage of the value problem. right?
Okay.
So money, and one of the problems, like you said, with the problem with Bitcoin is that it's volatile. It's
Right.
great if you're a speculator. It's great. Maybe you put a certain percentage of your wealth in it and that'll be great. But you don't want to use that as a daily form of transaction because
Right.
have I just paid you $12? I paid you $50.
Which at the rate of the volatility, intraday volatility can have wild swings where that's what's really eroded that as far as being a legitimate, tradable, fungible type transaction.
So people think about it like gold. They want to store some value in it
Yep.
as essentially a hedge against the local inflationary economy. And in the
Right.
US, that has some value. If you're in Argentina or all kinds of places right now in Nigeria, where all the places where there's rapid inflation, it makes sense to put your money in some Bitcoin. Now, what I'm focused on is this new sector called real world assets.
You're gonna have to break that down for us.
Yeah. So real world assets are like real estate is a real world asset.
Okay.
My phone is a real world asset.
Is that another term for tangible asset?
It's, well, commodities, basically anything that has a value outside of its digital presence is a real world asset. One of my favorite examples is the Bowie bonds. David Bowie wanted to take the money off the table and basically create these bonds where people bought all those future cash flows for his intellectual property.
What's so interesting about that is a good friend of mine, CJ DeSantis, his wife is an attorney also. Both of them are attorneys, and he also has a computer background. But his wife was the one that worked on the Bowie bond. And some of the innovation that we've been able to touch through friends and networks like this, but that was really innovative, where you could basically sell future revenue into a bond and a cash flow such as royalties, which was extraordinary.
Exactly. So let's go from Bitcoin, which used a technology called proof of work, which is incredibly inefficient, but very secure. All of these different miners solve puzzles in order to create a
You have to explain what a miner is. You and I were recently at the blockchain conference together out in Santa Clara and working on a project that's very exciting to me that we'll talk about another time. If I need to really get my head wrapped around this, and there's miners, if you could explain the various components of blockchain and the role of a miner. Pretty interesting.
Sure. It's really cool. So basically, any computer can do it. I mean, it's become a real industry unto itself, where you have these GPUs, graphic processing units, solving these problems, these puzzles. And basically what happens is every node, someone says, okay, I'm going to pay David Licken 1 Bitcoin. So I need to transfer it from one address on this blockchain ledger to another. He has an address, I have an address, we're transferring this between us. If David has the private key, this is how the blockchain works. There are 2 keys that unlock accounts. There's one key that unlocks it. There's one key that presents it. So the public key is your address. So I can send a Bitcoin to David at his address. And everybody knows that address. Now, if I'm holding my private key, I can send something out of my account to David's address.
Right, to my public address.
To his public address. Now, it's locked to that public address until David uses his private key to send it somewhere else. In Bitcoin, to actually add something to Ledger, and particularly to create a new Bitcoin, you have to do all of this computation and solve a problem. And the first computer to solve that problem gets the reward for producing that next block. So it's an incredibly inefficient system, but it was the first one that worked there. So what people have done, these miners, is set up enormous rigs, just computer, and they look for the cheapest electricity. So there was a lot of mining in Iceland where they have geothermal. They have There's
Because it is intense. I mean, power
Exactly.
intensive. That's the thing I was learning about that in fact,
And what's interesting, a friend of mine actually bought a dam in South Carolina just to mine Bitcoin. He bought it from the local electric company. But what happened? So there are a couple blockchains. Right now, I'm building everything on Solana because it used a different system.
right, Solana, right.
It's called proof of stake, and there's a specific type of proof of stake that Solana uses called proof of history. And this proof of history basically solves the distributed. So I've been in decentralized computing for a long time. And there are all these systems that people have developed. One was called Corba, Common Object Request Broker Architecture. There's different ways that people tried to get fully distributed, decentralized computing to work. The founder of Solana came up with this way for all of the systems to check their local clocks and not need to stay synchronized in a way that others do.
Interesting.
So he created this incredibly high performance blockchain that's still very secure and completely decentralized.
The most important thing we walk away from this is the importance of a decentralized system so we are back in control. And that's, again, miners play a key role in that.
Exactly. So now let me totally bring this home for you, the real estate professional. TradFi is paperwork. And it doesn't matter how sophisticated your systems are, you're still talking about boarding loans. And you're talking about boarding wet loans, right? So the paper is still wet. You're walking it across the shop floor to where it's going to dry, right? Servicing, everything that you do is based on what was happening in the 1800s. And
cake.
So you're using computers, but you're doing it in this incredibly arcane way. And as David said, you have a centralization of your fiat currency. And even the term fiat, the US dollar is a fiat currency. It's by fiat of the government, just like it was by fiat of the king. You have banks and corporations that then agree, I've now transferred this amount of money to you for this value. You have appraisers. Ultimately, that whole pathway where you have aggregators that have aggregated enough of these loans to chop them up into securities. And you have rating agencies that have this, and here's the value, and then it goes here. And then you have the sales force putting those into pension funds and putting those into private equity funds and whatever, right? So you have this incredibly arcane system. And what happened in 2008? Because you had the property owner way over here, okay? And you have the investor way over here, and you have so many hands in the pot.
Oh, I know. So inefficient.
And expensive and opaque, right? Who knows what this person who says, okay, this is a totally solid jumbo loan. If you saw The Big Short, that might have been sold to a stripper in Miami, you know. it just exposes this, both the inefficiency and lack of transparency. Okay, so what do we do to replace that? Web3, I actually never finished what Web3 was compared to the
That's
other.
right. Sorry, didn't mean to take you out on a different path, but yeah, finish that up.
Cool.
Relate it to it. This is really good.
Yeah. So you had portals in Web 1, you had platforms in Web 2, and you had protocols in Web 3. Protocols are agreements. They're ways to communicate. They're agreements on what a block is, what a token is, what value is, right? And if you have all those agreements, you don't need all of these documents and you don't need all these central authorities. We wrote a protocol that I call MOSH. It stands for Massively Multiplayer On-Chain Shared Hallucination. It's a concept. When I first got involved with the internet, the thing that intrigued me the most was a system at Xerox PARC called the MOO, which stood for Multi-User Object-Oriented Environment. Things like MUDs, multi-user dungeons, and all this. And then we got into massively multiplayer online games. So I started thinking about this question of value. and why people all agree that this dollar bill with George Washington's face is worth 1/3 of a loaf of bread or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
What you're really valuing, the asset is the bread, you know?
Right.
What I value here is my house. Someone's telling me that this piece of paper is worth, I'm in West Virginia, so let's say 1/700th of my house, right? So you show up with 700,000 of these and you can now buy my house, right? But this piece of paper is as arbitrary as anything else, right? It really is, except that we've agreed on it.
Yep.
So because we've agreed on it, I call that a shared hallucination, right? I mean,
actually, very good term, because that's what it is. It's absolutely is a shared hallucination.
Exactly.
Great way to put it, David. I love it.
So we have this protocol, and I thought, what are the elements that everybody has to agree on? So one is identity.
Right.
So we have something called a profile, which is a type of token that manages identity. And we have attribution, which is basically, if you're a mortgage banker or you're a realtor, you need attribution so you can get paid, right? If I'm selling a house and this is totally decentralized, I don't have a real estate office, I don't have an MLS system, it's totally decentralized, there needs to be some indication on the blockchain that this party, that I'm going to get paid this percent when this transaction happens, right? So we created a token called a badge that does that attribution. We created a token called a pass for access. So it could even be used for keys to get into the house if you own it, but it could get into chat groups. For example, if the pass is used for KYC AML, where we don't have to store your identity on chain, if you've gone through a process and you've gotten a pass that says, you can do this deal. It could say you're a mortgage banker. It could say you're a realtor or you're a financial advisor. If you have that, it can be associated with your profile and your identity, but it doesn't have to encapsulate that. So the pass is very important. And then the coin is money. So there's all kinds of tokens out there for money. So right now we could trade Sol, which is the native token for Solana. We could trade Bitcoin or Ethereum or Bonk. Recently, there are all of these meme coins where you can trade WIF, which stands for dog whiff hat. It went through the roof. People got 20,000 times their investment putting money into these crazy meme coins, right? That's what's cool about it. Anybody could create their own form of money, right? So there are coins. And then the final part, which is really the most important of this protocol, is the asset. So now, instead of going through that crazy TradFi Rube Goldberg contraption where so many things can go wrong, I, as a homeowner or commercial property owner, can also be the issuer. I can basically take my title and offer it on chain, and I can do it under exemptions from registration if I could sell it to anybody according to the laws. But let's say I want to get together with other property owners, or I'm a big commercial property owner. I can take all that property and basically issue a security on chain, what's called a security token. People who buy that on chain can also trade it, and it's liquid through these decentralized finance things. And basically, if you promise a certain percent yield, or you promise a share of, I own, let's say, my commercial property downtown in Shepherdstown, right? There's one tenant, she's been in there probably 10 years, paid like clockwork the first day of every month, right? Simply put that property, it's a small shop, it's in West Virginia, it was appraised at $300,000. I could say, okay, instead of going to a bank, why don't I just sell shares in that to the public? I could do that under Reg CF, regulation crowdfunding. I could do that under Reg D and just sell it to accredited investors. What's cool is there are these exchanges, and there's this system called Jupiter, which is an aggregator of decentralized exchanges. Okay. They have an initiative called the Giant Unified Market Initiative, where you can now trade stocks on the blockchain. You can trade
Really?
bonds, you can trade real estate, gold, all of these different things. And so if for some reason Gina, who's my tenant, stops paying rent and I stop distributing yield, then the price of a share and these shares, what we've done with this protocol, because we've added different protocols on top of ours. And if it's an undeveloped property, it could be a hectare or an acre. And let's just say I bought a huge portfolio, or I bought $10,000 of a huge commercial portfolio. What I would get is a bunch of tokens, digital assets, that then I can trade. So I can say, you know what? I want to keep these properties in Australia, but sell these properties in Guam because I think XYZ is going to happen. And this is just beginning to radically revolutionize real estate finance.
This could dramatically shift it and change it forever.
And what's so interesting is this is what we tried to do back in 1998.
Again, your ability to see over the horizon, see what's coming, timing is everything. But the concept with what we were doing together back then at Ultraprise with the company you created is now, because of where technology and things are at, it can actually be fully realized.
Because I remember I take the train up to DLJ or Bear Stearns and take the mortgage trading desks out for Korean barbecue or whatever was popular at the time. Take them to Atlantic City and gamble, but get them trading. But it wasn't really liquid. We called it a liquid market, but you had to do a lot of research and all that.
Right.
Now, what's really interesting here is there are all of these big hedge funds that are trading in crypto and trading in mortgage-backed securities and directly trading in real estate. They're building all these quant high-performance trading systems, right? And they're doing it on Solana and these high-performance crypto networks. Well, think about it. Now, they can actually provide liquidity so that anybody can trade real estate assets between the United States and
wherever.
Croatia, right?
Yeah.
And they can say, okay, here's my theory. This is what's going to happen with electricity in Texas. The reason the Big Short type stuff won't happen is because of the radical transparency and the liquidity, right? Yeah. It all works together as an actual market, not a fake market where like people are going to be able to see how much liquidity is there. So all of this, and to explain how new this is, the Giant Unified Market Initiative, I don't know if they call it Gummy or Gum, but was just announced probably maybe 6 weeks ago. There's very little happening. And so it's incredibly inspiring being on the cutting edge again, and really not just the cutting edge of technology, but the cutting edge of culture. It feels just like the way the internet felt back in 1994, 1995, when anything was possible. It felt good for a very short period of time, particularly for influencers who suddenly got a whole bunch of attention and could do things. But that constant struggle against the centralized platforms, tweaking their algorithms where all of a sudden your website doesn't rank, tweaking the algorithms where all of a sudden no one's seeing your Instagram posts.
Exactly.
It's all up to them. And now Web3 is like Web 1, but with all the power of Web 2. And I really think real estate finance, the mortgage industry, is going to be the one that benefits the most, at least those people who are willing to gain power by losing control, who are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to try this. As a realtor, instead of talking to my buddy, this mortgage banker, I'm going to help my friend tokenize all this. And then I'm going to have the mortgage banker is going to help price this and get buyers. And they're going to get paid on chain by providing that next step.
Really good. That's really good. But the thing that's really kept so many people, I don't say out of it. I mean, guys like me, I've been interested in this, but all the concerns about scams and how to keep this safe. Talk to that, David. How many people? People just went all in.
Absolutely. $44 million or something. I don't know. 44 billion.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Some crazy number.
Yeah. I think that's what keeps people going, this is just one of those fancy things that computer nerd heads are going to be working on. But the reality is, this is coming and it is getting secure. But speaking of how it is.
Let me answer your question about both those. Both of those were caused by centralization. FTX was a centralized exchange.
Yes.
So he had the keys. Your coins, your keys, not your coins, not your keys. I had, fortunately, it was a very small amount of money on FTX. I think it was like $80. I had it there. I don't remember. I was trying to do some trade and then I forgot about it. So when it went back, and it was starting to crater and I got in on time and I got my $80 out and I was like, oh, phew. But a lot of people had a lot more.
Yeah, but it's a lot more than $80. I mean,
right. Think about that. What we're building is something completely decentralized. All the other scams, because you're scrolling Twitter and this is DeFi, what people are doing, it's a Twitter X, Telegram, or Discord. They're learning about stuff and people put up fake links. They hijack accounts and you connect to a website and it drains your wallet. There are a million scams out there, phishing scams, etc. What we're building, it's so fully decentralized that we can't even scam you. You can't, because you don't need to connect to our website to do anything. All of the important infrastructure is open source, right? Our software is all open source. Once you actually get into the industry and you understand it, I remember the early days of the internet where it's like, oh God, I would never put a credit card in a website. What are you talking about? That's crazy.
Put that out there, someone to use. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. By the way, I signed all these things and I have all the carbon copies that were being tossed in the ditch, and it's got your credit card number and your signature on it. So I mean, it's some of the statements we made back then, not realizing how fraud prone our current system was, the positioning to get safe. And I think the key again is decentralization, which seems counterintuitive. The Fed's going to try to convince us that no, it has to be centralized to be secure because we are in control. We've been doing great monetary policy. Oh yeah, by that one, not so much. Anyway, the fact is leaning into or turning into a skid, driving on ice, and you're spinning out and it's turning. It seems counterintuitive, but it's really the key to this thing. There's so much about this, and David, I think that we'll wrap this thing up. I could go on and on. You do such a good job of articulating. There's certain aspects of the complexity to this, but how can people participate in this, David, and learn more? Number one, and start participating.
Yeah. A couple different ways, but the easiest, and don't be scared when you see this website. It was very much built for what we call degens. Degens are those traders, they're Web3 natives. So you'll see a lot of imagery that doesn't look business oriented, but it's Mosh. It's Mosh, 2 M's, MOSH.ai. Go in, it'll ask for your name and your email address. You'll get an email from me. There'll be other ways in. We have Telegram groups. We have a website that will actually help you make these transactions and actually help you tokenize your own real estate. And here's the main call to action. Go ahead and fail. I started writing code for the blockchain back in 2016. I made so many mistakes. I made so many bad trades. They pulled the rug out. Just try little things. I put in $100. I thought I was going to get something, and they were like, sorry. But just learn the basics. Like download a Phantom wallet, which I think is the easiest one to use.
Any particular Phantom wallet do you recommend over others?
Phantom is the brand. So in terms of a blockchain wallet, I found it's the easiest to use. Download the app for iOS or Android. It's PHANTOM. And then also get the, the Chrome plugin. But really, most importantly, I'm here. I'm available. My own personal website is motodave.com, MOTODAV.com. I answer all my email. You can tell I'm super passionate about this. And if you're out there listening, I'm happy to coach you, support you, because everyone's going to do it at some point. I don't know if it's 10 years, 20 years. after we're long gone, but it is going to move from the old way.
What was so surprising about that blockchain conference in Santa Clara they're at, it was a huge conference center and it was loaded with booze. I opened my eyes to the extent that this is a tsunami that is already cresting on our shores. And like the great book, the book that I keep telling everyone, The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleiman, he talks about this and some of the things that are changing. Folks, you've got to start getting it. As soon as we hang up here, I'm going to go download my Phantom wallet. I'm going to add the Chrome extension and start getting it. That's a great tip. And start playing with it. So that's good. That's awesome. David, thank you so much for being here today. Again, if you could cover your website and the way people can reach you.
Yeah, so you can always send an email to motodave@gmail.com. You can come to my personal website, motodave.com. So that's probably the easiest way to remember. The protocol is mosh.ai, and my company is at liquidhearts.club. So a lot of ways to reach me. Those are the easiest.
Listeners, pay attention to this. Start getting into this. Start understanding it. It's coming so fast. If you could have been at that conference to realize how much traction is already happening. And there's nobody better to walk us through it than my friend David Levine. David, thank you so much for being here. Greet Monica and all three of your kids. Sorry about that.
Daisy wasn't born until...
Oh, that's right. When we were working together, there was two. Yeah, that's right. And is Daisy the one that is the aeronautical engineer?
Yeah, she's the brains of the operation. She's building experimental aircraft. So the aircraft she's building doesn't have any moving parts. It's all jets of air that steer it and all this. It's crazy business, but
crazy fun. I would love to sit around your Christmas dining room table, listen to the conversation. It's got to be phenomenal. David, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for sharing this. And we're starting our journey together, listeners. Let's get into it and get a hold of David, please. I appreciate it. I'd love to hear from you what you think of this podcast and this interview. It's coming. You don't believe me? Go grab the book, The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleiman. It's amazing what's happening. Our world is changing. Are you going to be up on it? Encourage you to join us in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Lickin' on Lending. Our passion is to bring you the latest insights, trends, and updates from the world of mortgages. So on this show, if you're a seasoned industry veteran or just getting started, it's your go-to source for all things mortgage. We hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back soon. Take care, and we'll see you next time on Lickin' on Lending.